Hello, this is Jason from Cisco VPN TAC team, and in this video we are going to configure the AnyConnect initial configuration for FTD, Firepower Threat Defense, managed by FMC, the Firepower Management Center. Before we get into the specifics of the configuration, it's assumed that you already have the FTD device being managed by FMC, and that all of the other initial configurations interfaces are already set up. The first step that you will need to complete for the AnyConnect Remote Access will be to make sure that you have the appropriate licenses. You will need both a FTD device that is registered with a token that contains the strong encryption, as well as the AnyConnect licenses associated with this device. To do this, we'll go to software.cisco.com, and underneath the Smart Software Licensing, in the licensing section, we'll click there. To bring up a new page, we're going to verify that you are indeed in the correct account, as notated in the top right. Click on Inventory, and then click on New Token. A new window will pop up. The two fields we can do here are the expire after, which is the amount of time that the token is valid for, and most importantly is allow export control functionality for the products registered with this token. This is what's going to allow us to use the AnyConnect encryption. Finally, you click on Create Token. A new token will be generated, and underneath the new tokens, now you'll see the first token will be the last one that was created. You click on the little blue box, and it will open up a new window that will show you the full token. Copy this value, and we'll use that to register in a step a little bit later. Underneath the Licenses tab, you can review any other licenses that are associated with your account. If you don't see any AnyConnect licenses here, then you'll need to purchase them first. On the Licensing tab, the total purchased licenses will be equal to the number of user licenses that you have purchased. For example, if you purchased 25 users, you would see 25 here. Each time you associate this license with a device, the in-use count will go down by 1. This is not related to the number of users that are actively connected using the license. Instead, it is the number of devices that have been registered and are using the AnyConnect license. Now that we've created a new token with the export functionality and associated the FTD devices with the AnyConnect licenses, we'll move over to the FMC, where we will click on System, Licenses, Smart Licenses, and then click Register. A new window will pop up. Then you will paste in the token that we copied earlier and click Apply Changes. In order to allow FTD to use the AnyConnect licenses, we have two options. From the Smart Licensing page, after registration, you click on Edit Licenses. A new window will pop up. Click on the relevant tab, whether that is AnyConnect Plus or AnyConnect Apex. Click on the device you'd like to associate with the AnyConnect license and click Add, and then Apply. Additionally, you can go underneath Devices, Device Management, and click to edit that device. Click on Licenses in the top right, and select the appropriate license here, and OK. The final step in the registration will be to deploy the changes to the FTD device and then verify that everything did register and associate the licenses correctly before you begin to install AnyConnect. Now that we've successfully registered the FTD device and we've associated the AnyConnect licenses with that device, we'll have to do a few other additional configuration in preparation for using the wizard to configure AnyConnect. We'll need to create a certificate signing request. We'll need to install the CA certificate, and then we'll need to install the identity certificate. To do this, we'll log into FMC. We'll click on Objects. We'll scroll down to the PKI section, expand that, and click on Certificate Enrollment, and add Certificate Enrollment. New blocks will pop up. This will create a container for our certificates. We'll give it a name. And underneath the CA information, we have the options of SCEP, self-signed certificate, manual, and PKCS12. In this case, we're going to do manual. Here we will copy the CA certificate from the CA that is going to be the signer of our identity certificate. We'll paste that in. Make sure that we do not have any spaces after the end certificate. Delete that. And we'll configure our certificate parameters. And we'll go ahead and hit save. I'm going to add a second certificate, which is not required for the initial setup. I'm just going to show you a caveat that is related to the CA that actually signs our certificate. Both these CA certificates I created in OpenSSL. The first one is the CA that signed our identity certificate. The second one is just a dummy CA. We'll fill in the same parameters here as well. And click Save. There are two instances that you can create a CSR that will be used to send to the CA to create identity certificate. In the first case, you actually know for sure which CA is going to sign your certificate because you've already got certificates from that CA before, or if it's an internal CA, then you would know what it was. In the second instance with the CA2, I'm just taking a CA certificate from the CA vendor and using that as a placeholder to create a trust point so that I can create the certificate signing request. Once we've set up the container with the CA certificates inside of it, we'll go to Devices and Certificates. Here, we'll add a new certificate. We'll select the device and we'll select the CA. In the first case, I'm going to select CA number 2, even though I know that is the wrong one, because that's the case that most often happens. And we'll click Add. This will import and associate the certificate authority with this device. And then we can go ahead and click on ID, click Next. This will generate a certificate signing request. We will copy off this information here, save it into a file, and also send it to our CA to get a new certificate. In the interest of saving time, I have already done this. So this would have been the certificate signing request that I had created. I'm going to paste that in there. And I've also already gotten a certificate. So I will click Browse Identity Certificates. This would be what came back from the CA. I'll select the identity certificate they provided me, click Open, and click Import. It'll process this and it'll try to associate that identity certificate with the certificate authority that we have in this container. And as you'll see, identity certificate import required. That failed because the CA was the wrong CA. When the CA sends you back the information, as you saw in the previous folder, they also sent you their identity certificate. So what you do is go back to Objects, Object Management, PKI Certificate Enrollment, and you would create the new certificate enrollment object, CA1 in this case, and fill out the same credentials. Then come back to Devices and Certificates, click Add, same device, and this time we'll select CA1, which is the new CA that we know signed our identity certificate for sure. Click Add. While that is doing that, we will copy the CSR that we had already from the first attempt to get our identity certificate. We'll click on ID for CA number 1, continue. This will generate a new CSR, but we don't need this one. So we will copy it, remove that, and then paste our valid CSR back in here. Browse identity certificates once again. Add our ID and import. And now you'll see after it processes, it will successfully associate that ID cert with the CA because that is the CA that assigned it. We can go in here and view both the CA certificate, which is signed by my root CA I created with OpenSSL, and then the intermediate certificate that I created with the additional SHA-256 settings. Then we can see our identity certificate here, signed by the intermediate CA, and all the files that we've filled out previously. If we looked at the other CA that we first started with, we'll notice that that is CA Intermediate 2. And since that did not match with the CA that signed our identity certificate, that is why that failed. I'm going to go ahead and delete this other CA since we're not going to need that. Now that we've created the certificate, we're going to go ahead and move on to the next step, which will be configuring a realm and setting up authentication. You may already have a realm set up if you've been using this for the firewall. Just in case, we'll go to System Integration, click on Realms, and here you would have no realms if you did not. Click on New Realm, fill out the relevant information, whether you're using a Microsoft AD server or an LDAP server. It'll be a little bit different. Hit OK. That'll bring you to this screen where now you can edit the other information. Underneath Realm Configure, we'll see the settings that we had set up. And then we'll add a server here, an IP address, LDAP S if you're using secure LDAP with the certificate. and test the connection is successful. Once we've configured the realm, we'll go back to Objects. At this point, we have two options for authentication. We can either use Radius or we can use LDAP. LDAP authentication would already be set up in that previous step. However, you cannot restrict users unless all of your users are in one specific OU that you set up in that system. For Radius, click on Radius Server Group, click on Add a Server, give it a name, and then click on the green plus, give it an IP address, authentication port either 1812 or 1645, your key, and then the accounting port either 1813 or 1646. We want to go ahead and set up a specific interface as opposed to routing. This interface will be the interface that routes towards your authentication server. The reason for this is that if you do not do this, it'll send a NAS address of 0000, and unless your Radius or LDAP is configured to respond to 0000, it'll drop the packet. If you set up the correct interface, it'll actually send the IP address of that interface to Radius or LDAP, and then you'll be able to set up your policies to allow and expect a request coming from that device. You go ahead and hit save. And hit save again. And now we have Radius configured. If you're configuring LDAP, it's already been set up in the realm configuration. This will work just fine for a typical normal deployment as long as the users that are connecting to AnyConnect are in the same OU. For instance, if you had a OU for VPN remote access users. If you wanted to separate the users into different groups and assign a group policy based on those groups, then you would need to do an additional flex configuration. As a side note, flex configurations are not supported on FMC. They are available, but it is a best effort troubleshooting if something should not work. Additionally, any flex configurations that are being pushed out should be done in a maintenance window because there is a potential chance of having the deployment fail, which could cause a network disruption. If group policy assignment is required via LDAP attributes, then we'll need to configure flex configuration. I've already created two objects. We have an LDAP attribute map, and we have the AAA server for LDAP. AAA server for LDAP, as you'll see, we'll just go into the AAA server configuration and then add the LDAP attribute map that we're going to create in the next object. Notice that I did say AAA serve without the R. With the R, it'll fail deployment. This is deployed every time, and it's appended to the end of the configuration as FMC is deploying to the FTD. The LDAP attribute map is our LDAP configuration, named LDAP attribute map. Notice here again, I did not add the last P. We have a mapped name, member of group policy. And then the map values, member of, this will be the CN group of the users that are going to be able to access AnyConnect. And group 1 will be the attribute that you pass back via LDAP to FTD, and that will map it to a group policy that we'll configure in the coming steps. In order to get this value here, you would log into your LDAP server. If it's Windows, then you would type in dsquery user, SAMID, and the name of a user. That will give you this output here. The user here is CN Cisco, so everything thereafter would be what we would put in the LDAP attribute map. Notice that this is a deploy once, and it is prepended or added at the beginning of the configuration before FTD pushes out any other changes. If you were going to create another group of users, then you would come back in and do LDAP attribute map on the first line, and then you would add the member of for the new group. You would omit this line because that will already be in place. Once we've configured our two FlexConfig objects, we would go into Devices, FlexConfig. We have a FlexConfig policy. If you do not, you can create a new one. You'll notice that over here we have the two that we created. We'll go ahead and apply that one. The LDAP attribute map, since we configured it as a prepend, will go on the top, and the AAA server will go on the bottom because it's appended. Go ahead and hit save. Preview the config. Select the device that we're going to push this configuration to. It'll generate the differential configs that it's planning on sending out. We'll notice at the top is our first prepended attribute map. If we scroll down to the bottom, we'll find our appended AAA server configuration. Now the realm and the authentication pieces are set up. We'll move on to creating an IP pool for the users that are connecting with AnyConnect to be handed out an IP address. Back in Objects, Object Management, underneath Address Pools, we'll click on IPv4 Pools. We'll create a new pool. Create a range of IP addresses. A subnet mask. And save. The final step before entering in the wizard and configuring AnyConnect will be to add the AnyConnect packages and any XML profiles that you may use. The XML profile is only required if you are going to be using IKV2 connections. If you're connecting with a standard SSL VPN connection, then this is not a requirement. Additional features can be added to AnyConnect via the XML profiles, but again, this is not a requirement. To do this, underneath Objects, we'll scroll to the bottom, VPN, AnyConnect File. We'll see here that we already have AnyConnect versions applied, as well as an XML file. If you do not, go ahead and click Add AnyConnect File, a description, browse your local flash. You'll need to make sure that you've downloaded the appropriate versions and packages from cisco.com. And click on a file type. We can either upload an AnyConnect image or an XML profile. And then hit save and it'll import it. Notice that the packages do end in web deploy K9 PKG. The pre-deploy images will not work to be installed on FTD. Now we're ready to go ahead and start the wizard. To do so, we'll go to Devices, VPN, Remote Access. We're only allowed to have the wizard targeting one device. Since this FMC is only currently managing one device, I removed an existing one. We'll click Add. The wizard will pop up. We'll give it a name. Select the VPN protocols that you want to allow over the AnyConnect connection, SSL, IPv2, one or both. Select the device, Add, and click on Next. Can't be any spaces in the name. The connection profile name is the name of the tunnel group that they're connecting to. It's also configured as a connection alias, so it can be used to connect to the VPN. Under Authentication, we can have AAA only, certificates only, or certificates and AAA. In this example, we're using AAA only, and we'll go ahead and select our radius server that we've configured. Scroll down and add an IP address pool. Select the one that we've just recently added. Hit OK. And for now, we'll leave the default group policy. We'll configure another group policy in a later section. Notice that you can also use AAA radius to pass out IP addresses to users individually, or DHCP servers, both of which are beyond the scope of this video. Next, we will associate the packages that we've applied in the previous step. We will select our interface that we're going to allow AnyConnect connections coming in on, in this case the outside. We will select the certificate that we applied in the previous step, and we will click on Bypass Access Control Policies. This will put in rules for access control that allows AnyConnect connections to come in. If you're currently using any sort of malware checking or URL filtering, then you will need to uncheck this box and then apply a basic access policy to allow AnyConnect in. And finally, on this last screen, you'll see all of the settings. Once we're done, we're still going to need to update any additional access control policies, create NAT exemptions, DNS, port configuration, and any other additional network interface configurations which hadn't been done previously. We'll click Finish. This will bring us into our AnyConnect configuration section. We'll see here the tunnel group that we created, FTD training, has radius authentication and authorization and a default group policy. Click on the pencil to view those settings. We'll see our VPN pool. If we configure DHCP servers, they would be here. We can add additional pools here if we'd like to. We can modify the AAA settings to AAA certificates, certificate only. Change our authentication server, our authorization server, and even set up accounting. And finally, we can set up aliases. These will be viewable in the drop-down menu once the user clicks to log in. Underneath the Access Interface tabs. Checkbox here will allow users to select the connection profile or the tunnel groups when they're logging in. So if we had multiple connection profiles, they could choose between the ones they wanted. The port that we're going to connect to, our certificate for SSL and IKV2, and again the bypass access control policies. Additionally, if you had another outside interface, you could select it here and allow AnyConnect on both interfaces. Under the Advanced tab, we can modify any of the images that we have uploaded and delete them, add new ones from your flash that you've downloaded from Cisco if you wanted to go to the newer image. We can change address assignment policies. Since we're only using local pools, go ahead and uncheck those and make the connection just a little bit faster. If we're authenticating with certificates, we can set up certificate maps that will map the user to a specific group. And additionally, we can configure new group policies. Create a new group policy. Select the protocols that we want available. The IP address pools. This IP address pool here will override the IP address pool in the tunnel group since it's more specific. We can set up a banner that users will see when they log in. We can configure any of our DNS servers here. Simply a host and an address. This will push out the DNS configurations to the users when they connect to AnyConnect. Additionally, we can set up split tunneling. AnyConnect has the option to send all traffic over the VPN tunnel to the FTD device. Then the FTD device can decide whether or not to forward that out to the internet or to drop the packets. Additionally, we can allow specific networks over the tunnel. All other networks would go out the user's local interface, or we can exclude specific networks from coming over the tunnel and all other networks will go out the tunnel. Let's look on specific networks below. We can apply an access list that we've already created, or we can create a new one. Add individual networks that we would want to go over the tunnel, or all RFC addresses. And then apply them here. DNS request will follow the same rules. We can either follow the split tunnel policies, we can send all requests over the tunnel, or we can create specific domains. Cisco.com would go over the tunnel, everything else would go out to their local DNS. We can configure a client profile, which is required for IKV2 connections. Additionally, in here you can set up certificate mapping and a bunch of other things. SSL settings are very rarely changed from the defaults. MTU is here, that's the biggest one. We can set up the keep alives, dead peer detection. Most of this is left as default as well. Finally, on the advanced section, we can create a traffic filter, which is another access list. This access list will be from the client's perspective in. A typical use case for a VPN filter would be if you'd like to only allow traffic from certain protocols through the tunnel. you could apply a permit for, say, 443, but deny RDP 3389, or vice versa. And finally, the session settings. We can set the limit on the number of devices a user can log in with. So in this instance with 3, user could log in with 2 computers and a phone, 3 computers, whatever the case may be. If the user tries to log in with a 4th device, the first device that was logged in will be kicked out. We can set up the maximum connection time, which is a total session time before the AnyConnect session will close. For instance, 8 hours. Additionally, we can set up an idle timeout value. If the user is inactive for this amount of minutes, then it will disconnect the session. Once we've configured everything, we'll go ahead and hit save and OK after we apply it to the device. Back under the connection profile, if we wanted to modify the group policy that is associated with this tunnel group, we can just go ahead in here and change it to the new one we created and hit save. Once we're finished, go ahead and hit save. Now that AnyConnect has been configured, we have a few more final steps. First one will be access control policies. If we did the bypass VPN protocols, then this wouldn't be a necessary step. In order to configure these, just click on policies, edit our basic policy. We'll add a new rule. Typically this rule wants to be somewhere near the top. Give it a name. We want to allow traffic going to the outside interface with a network of the AnyConnect pool as a destination. Go ahead and hit add here and then save. Next we'll configure NAT. So go to devices, NAT, and then in your NAT policies, go ahead and click add a rule. First one we'll create will be a NAT for U-turn. In case you're doing full tunnel, we'll have to allow the AnyConnect traffic to come in the outside interface and then U-turn or hairpin back out the outside interface to go to the internet and come back in. This will be a dynamic NAT. Be a NAT rules before, or we want it at the top. So if you have other NAT rules, we'd go ahead and put this at, one of the top rules. This is for U-turn. And for the interface objects, it'll be any, and the destination will be outside. We'll do the AnyConnect pool, translate it to the destination interface, and then the address will be any. No other changes here. Hit OK. Next we'll add a rule so that the inside LAN addresses and the AnyConnect VPN clients can communicate. This one must be above the dynamic, otherwise it'll cause problems. So we're going to have this above rule number 1. This will be a static. This will be no NAT to the LAN. So from the inside, going to the outside, the LAN addresses, whatever they may be. Don't NAT that, just keep it the same. And then when the destination is going to the pool, this will be bi-directional, so it'll work from the pool in and from the LAN out. Finally, we want to also don't do any proxy ARP and perform a route lookup after we do the no NAT statements. Go ahead and hit OK. Notice that our LAN to AnyConnect is on the top, and underneath that would be the dynamic any to the outside from the AnyConnect pool going to any external address basically. Then from here you'd go ahead and hit save and you'd be ready to deploy. Go ahead and deploy. Always make sure that you click on the plus to determine what is actually going to be deployed, just in case somebody else has made any other changes that you weren't aware of. And click on deploy. To view the process, you have a failed deployment. And click on show history. After clicking on show history, the previous deployments show up. We'll go ahead and click on admin that just failed and transcripts. We scroll down to the bottom, and in this particular case we'll notice that the error is AAA server group LDAP does not exist. That was because the configuration for my flex config underneath LDAP was calling a AAA server group that did not exist. So in order to resolve this issue, went ahead and went back into the LDAP configuration for the server group, and we changed this to match the name and the IP address of the LDAP configuration piece that we had in integration underneath the realms. So you notice here that the name matches here. That's for the server group. And the IP address is the individual IP address. Once we did that, saved the configurations, and deployed, we had a successful deployment and everything is working properly. Once you've connected to AnyConnect successfully, you're all done. However, if there are any challenges with the connection after you have configured everything, there's two things you can do to make the resolution of your case go a little bit quicker. First, if you go into device management, you find the IP address of your FTD device, and then you can SSH with the administrative user to that address. Go to System, Support, Diagnostics, enable here, there's no password, and then show run. Give you the show run and configuration, save that output, and attach it to the case. In addition to opening up AnyConnect, click on the little gear icon, click on Diagnostics, and walk through the wizard of just the default, next, and it will prepare diagnostic bundle. You attach that to the case as well. We'll be able to review that and get back to you fairly quickly with the most likely causes and schedule a WebEx if a WebEx will be needed to get you up and running. If you don't already have the Dart bundle on your machine, then you can go to software.cisco.com, go to the AnyConnect page to download. Scroll down, and depending on your version of either Windows, Mac, or Linux, go ahead and for Windows specifically, we would get the AnyConnect pre-deploy package. Includes individual MSIs. Go ahead and click on download, and you'll have to log in and accept the user agreement. You'll have to have either the Apex or the Plus license associated with your user account in order to get the downloads. Once you download that, then you go ahead and open that up in your Windows Explorer. And as you can see, here are all the individual packages. And we would just go ahead and install the Dart pre-deploy. That will install Diagnostic and Reporting Tool on your machine. And then you can run it directly from your machine, just like I was showing you in the previous section. The Dart bundle will pull all of the information from previous connections up until the last time that you cleared the event logs in the event viewer. So it can be done after a failed connection attempt. Thank you so much for taking the time to go through this video. Please let us know if you have any questions.